Nobody has ever asked me when I go to a gallery or anywhere else. Nobody has ever asked me what grades I got in school. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a different world when because I was in medicine, it was just the opposite. That
Right. Well,
it's
that
all
makes
about
sense.
grades.
You really need to, you can't know in an instant if somebody has learned the material as a doctor or a physicist or whatever else, or as a teacher. So in a visual medium like art, I mean, you can tell immediately, if the person is put their time in or not. So yeah, it's a completely different thing as a doctor. Yeah.
Though in reality, it's the same thing. It doesn't matter. Nobody ever asked me if I got an A in histology or anatomy or any of that. And
But it's just because they figure if you've gotten to this point, someone else has checked
yeah,
your,
well,
you
that's the
know,
old joke is, what do you call the best doctor in the class and the last doctor in the class and the doctor? So,
right.
you just, if you make it through the grind, they assume that you have good. But it was very
Right.
grade oriented, and I was very grade oriented until my second year in medical school, and I was like, oh, I don't really doesn't why does this really matter as long as I learn the material? So
Right.
that way I can have a life and do other things as well. I still got good grades, but it wasn't, I didn't have to get A's. It was like, oh, there is another thing to life besides grades. So, you know
Yeah.
and let's live this other part of our lives, examine that part too, which has great meaning besides just, oh, I got the highest in the class, because it doesn't really matter. And
So
it's
how long were you a doctor?
about 8 years. Yeah.
8 years. Okay,
Yeah, I kept
cool.
my license until like 2012 or 14, 2014, something like that. And
Where
then,
did you grow up? Where was your
so I grew up in New Mexico. So
okay.
where I grew up. And so I'm always been into the Southwest, and,
Yeah.
love the Southwest and Western art and all that. Though we didn't really have
Uh,
art where I grew up, which was interesting because I grew up in a smaller town in New Mexico. And the only
mhm.
art that we had was Native American art, and it was mainly Paleolithic art, like the Clovis points
Yeah.
found right by where we lived, or things like Billy the Kid and that kind of stuff. So, I didn't learn about art until really probably until I was about 18, other than native arts, but the other type of art I didn't. So I loved native arts and collected that, and those inspired me. But all the other stuff I didn't know about because there was nothing to know. There was nowhere to go. I'm not in Chicago, right?
Right.
I can
Well,
only,
even I was in Chicago. I had never gone to the Art Institute or anything until,
or
I
Field
went
Museum. You must have
downtown.
gone to the Field Museum, though.
I think we went to the Field Museum like on a school trip once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't have, well, we would go to Blackwater Draw, which was again, all about prehistoric Clovis man,
Right.
that kind of stuff. So
My
that,
mom would take us to the zoo all the time when I was a kid. I actually was born in Chicago near the Lincoln Park Zoo. That was really the place that we went. The Field Museum was quite far away for, someone without a car and all that. So yeah,
right. And probably that made some kind of a connection to you with, animals and being outdoors and all that.
I'm sure. Yeah.
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 Well,
Wait,
yeah,
what got you into what was the first paintings that you saw that struck you? Was it when you were a doctor or was it after that?
no, I was 18. Yeah. First one was when I was 18, when I went to the Guggenheim for the first time. So that was
Oh,
all of that. That was all. And I got to see Robert Indiana's piece and Love. And I was like, oh, what is all this? This is unbelievable. Because we didn't even have art, really. We didn't really have good art classes in high school either. So there was no availability to take art. And I was focused on science at that point completely. But yeah, seeing the Guggenheim at 18 was like, oh, this is something unique. This
was
is
it an emotional reaction you had to the work or just a new experience?
yeah, new experience. I wouldn't say emotional. It's just like, oh, that's a Van Gogh. And my sister go, no, Van Gogh. And I go, huh, okay. I don't even know how to say the guy's name. So she was living in New York and she was experiencing all this. She was in music. She was a musician. And so all this, I was like, oh, there are other things out here to be seen, besides arrowheads and things like that, that there's other types of art, there's other kinds of things. I liked history, but again, when you're so science based and you're so focused, sometimes
Mhm.
it's hard to see the other component, what's
Right.
around you. And I was just completely and utterly focused on science. and I was very successful, and I won a lot of awards and things in high school for science. So that gets and my parents were scientists. So you get reinforced into that
Right.
road. But then when you actually start to look and go, oh, well, there are other things that are interesting too that are unique. And then there was a point where it just flipped and I could go, oh yeah, this is really, yeah, why would I want to do anything else but look at
Yeah.
art? But I didn't have the opportunities in high school or, in medicine. So when I figured it out, then that was it. So and here I am.
Yeah.
Now all I do is art and talk to artists and creativity, and that's all that's my life, is surrounded by that component, which is where I should have been probably to begin with, but how did I know?
But when you're in art like you are, I mean, that's not art isn't like a separate thing from everything else. So I mean, you're probably learning things about all kinds of other things through art. I
Oh
mean, like
yeah,
you said,
absolutely. But
Clovis, you got
I look through
history.
it through the lens of art.
Right, right.
Everything is filtered through art history, and
Yeah,
creativity. Even though, yeah, I love to talk to all sorts of people. I'm curious. I love business. I love all these other components, but it will all come somehow from art. So if
right.
somebody comes to me and selling something, and I get to talk about the piece or look at that, but then I go, well, tell me about you. I might go on a whole tangent and spend an hour talking to somebody about what they did, working in the mining industry or whatever it is.
Right,
But
right,
wouldn't have had that conversation if art didn't bring it open
right,
to them. And I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of those conversations with people, because again, I'm curious and I like to hear, how their life
right.
turned out. Why do I get this piece? Why is it in my hands? And so it's through the filter of art and creativity. So
Yeah.
and
I love that about it. Yeah, that's I think that's why I like painting so much, is like as an excuse to go and explore. I don't
yeah,
think I could handle being an artist if I was just in my studio painting someone else's photograph or some illustration that I was told to do, you know. I mean, I just don't think I have the personality for that. It's too much curiosity, you know. I almost have to combine it with art so that I have an excuse. Okay, no, I'm making money too, but I'm also then doing all this other stuff, you know. It's
yeah, and
kind of
well,
fun.
that's why you involve your models, for instance, right? You were telling me about how you actually, when you do paintings and things, that you'll actually give money back to the model, not just when you're modeling, but actually after the painting sale, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's probably the funnest thing, you know, when you can, I mean, I know people who do that not just as painters. I mean, it's addictive to be able to, you know, you make it a collaboration between you and somebody else, you know, you and a painter, and even if it's people that I don't know because I've taken photographs at a powwow or it's somewhere else, you know, then you can give money to the American Indian College Fund, which is one of my favorites, and or some an environmental cause that you care about, or this or that. You know, it's just it feels so good because yes, you got to experience it yourself and you get to meet the people. You do this painting and you make money from it. But then in doing the painting and making money, it gives you a chance to actually even contribute to whatever the cause is, whatever the place you're visiting. And so it makes you feel like you're making a difference, not just in you know, opening someone's mind maybe to something, but actually physically, actually being able to get money to support those things that I remember. One of the important things to me, I remember Clyde Aspivig when Northwest Rendezvous. I don't know if you ever remember that show. It was in Helena, Montana, years and years ago. We used to have a camp out and we'd paint there and we'd all have a show. So Matt Smith and Ralph Oberg and Pong Ho, all those people were early people. Sue and I, we do it. Well, week paint out. Clyde Aspivig did the show several times. And one time, Clyde had put a painting in, and it was of this landscape. And he talked about the fact that the painting was of a place in Montana. And Clyde's very conservative politically, but he spoke out about the fact that these laws were all being changed, and everybody in Montana was kind of switching because they were destroying these landscapes. The mining industry had given free rein, and it was causing all kinds of pollution and environmental damage. And he got all this pushback. One of the art magazines published an editorial saying, you know, that this sort of thing has no place in art to be talking about, these political issues. And I wrote in support of Clyde and said, that's crazy, to think that these are just pretty pictures of a place and not to be somebody who knows about it because he's lived in Montana his whole life. He knows all these issues. He knows all the people who use the land, and the fact that he is bringing to our attention, not only through the painting, saying this is going to be destroyed, is being destroyed. And again, he gives lots of money to environmental causes and all this sort of stuff to preserve these things that he loves. And so I don't do as many landscapes, but I'm also an environmental activist as well, and have worked here in North Carolina with the Nature Conservancy, and helping some of the farmers with information on how they can put land easements and stuff, because they care also about preserving some of their land. And so yeah, I think it's not like something I do just because I feel like, oh, I got to give to charity. It's like, wow, I feel like my paintings have done some good, and even if it's just something that's beautiful, it's in some way preserving that, in some way, fostering other people and in their journeys, if it's people that I'm inspired by. So yeah, I don't want to feel like people feel like it's because I'm like this, like, just good person. It's like, honestly, it makes me feel good. It's like selfish. So
Well,
yeah,
I mean, you get gratitude for it for yourself when you do
yeah,
this, which makes you feel good, which makes all of us feel good. And I would think, and I might be wrong, but you could tell me, the fact that you had the ability to not be in a wheelchair your whole life because of technology, you probably have great gratitude that there go I, because I was happened to be born in a time and in a place where I don't have to be
yeah.
that gratitude has probably been with you for day one, I would think.
Well, every single I had to have many operations over many years growing up, and every time I go into the hospital, you can't help but feel a little sorry for yourself because you're surrounded by kids who, you know, do all the things, some things that you can't do. And then you go in there and then you always come out feeling so lucky. So it's like reinforced over and over because
Right.
I was with kids. It was Children's Memorial Hospital that I would always go to. And, there were kids that are dying from cancer. There's kids who lost their legs. There were all kinds of different things. And so, yeah, I mean, there's always going to be people who are more fortunate than you, are better at you at certain things, but you do what you can with what you have, and you've got to it's that whole glass empty and half full sort of thing. I mean, you can't just go around your life. And I know people like that. They go around and just looking at people who are luckier than them or
Oh,
better looking than them or whatever it is. They've had these advantages that I haven't had, and
right.
therefore it's not fair. So, and yeah, and sometimes things that seem like, horrible things turn out to be, you wouldn't have done things if you hadn't had that particular experience.
Yeah. Well, it
Um,
made you who you are, no doubt.
it does, yeah. And it's I have this happen. I used to have this happen with a lot of artists, who, and I hear it every now and then still, people will say, well, look at this gallery or this show, look at the, and they'll point out somebody in the gallery who isn't as good as they are. And they'll say, why am I not in this gallery?
Right.
And I always just tell them, don't do that. Always compare yourself to the best in the gallery. Are you as good as this best artist? Well, no, I'm not that good. I said, well, then that should be your goal, to get
Right.
better than that artist. And
Right.
often it's not even getting better. It's just being more original, doing something that is different, not trying to copy, what that person has done for their success. But, I always felt that way. I used to love to play chess, and, there was two types of players who just would get so upset when they lose. And so they would only play people they could beat, and they never
Mhm.
got better. And then
Yeah.
there's people who, and I always like to play people better than me if I could. And I always like to paint with people who are better than me, even now. And because that's how you learn, And so I'm always wanting to do that, paint things that don't know how to paint with somebody else who's an expert in that. It's like you just learn.
Yeah. Well, you
So
can't get better unless you I always play when I play golf, I play better when I'm playing with better golfers. You know,
Yeah,
I focus more or whatever. I don't, I
yeah.
play better.
If
And
you play people you would always win with, well, you realize, okay, you just think, oh yeah, no, I'm great, and you never like realize, okay, well, I'm not so good. You don't push yourself, and so that's kind of a curse, it's again, it's that idea of, you know, that this goal of getting in the gallery is the goal. Or, winning this one game is what the goal is. That's not the goal. You know, and so, people have to, it's really difficult. We all fall into that,
oh yeah,
feeling better,
well,
thinking,
ego gets in the way a lot of times. That's the thing. We all have
well,
ego,
and a
and
lot of this stuff, art is not like a golf game or a game of chess or things like that. It's this idea of, who wins and people love horse races, they love seeing a winner and stuff. So that's just what happens with shows. But as we know, you have 10 different judges, you're going to have 10 different
yeah,
winners. Art is not like that. It's not like we all agree that Sargent's the best. It's like, oh no, I mean, I think, Mancini might be better, or Waterhouse is, uh, you can't compare them. It's ridiculous to think that there's one best in art. And so I think you got to get out of that goal-oriented thing and really just think about, yourself and getting better, being able to say what you want to say. So,
do you think about legacy at all for yourself?
I don't think about it that much. I think I'm pretty much a person who lives very much in the moment. I
Mm,
think Sue jokes me because a lot of times I forget so much stuff because I don't dwell in the past, and I don't do paintings or write stories thinking, in 100 years I want people to still be. And I have hear artists say that, I want this to be. I think it's impossible to predict, and so I don't think about that. I'm really just in the moment thinking about things. The only thing I feel like, and even those things, those documentaries that I made, especially the first one, um, In God We Trust, I did have a want to. It wasn't even that I thought, I actually didn't think nobody was gonna watch it. It was just me with a camera. And I just wanted to do it because I was so upset. I would have felt bad for myself if I didn't say something. If I didn't say, I stood up and said this was wrong,
mhm.
and then I went into it angry. And then meeting people, I came out of it liking all those people that I met, even if I disagreed with them. So I learned a lot personally. And then I put it on YouTube. YouTube wasn't around for that long at that time. And I just thought, I'm done with it now. I've said it,
Right.
nobody will watch it, and then it turned into a big thing. So I feel like that may have more of a legacy in the long run, but maybe not. I mean, issues change and people see different things. And it really doesn't matter to me that much what people in the future, if they like it or not. I'm really not that focused on legacy.
Well, you
So
can't
yeah,
control it, first of all, really. I mean, legacy is really kind of out of your control.
yeah.
And
And some of my favorite painters and paintings are ones that people have never heard of. When we were in Rome, there was this artist named Michetti, who is one of my friend. I forget his first name, but he really was. It was a painting I saw in the Art Institute that was only up for a few months, and then it was put away in the library, back in storage. It's one of my favorite paintings, and nobody has ever heard of him. Very few people have ever heard of him, and he's one of my favorite artists of all time. And that painting was Springtime in Love, and I put it in that Banishment of Beauty little slideshow documentary that I put on YouTube. But his paintings are no less great to me than that. Um, and I don't, in some paintings I see that I don't like Picasso at all, and other people do. That's fine, but I don't really feel like he's more successful than Michetti or other artists that I really admire. So it doesn't really matter to me if that's like a numbers game. I mean, do you really think some of the top selling books that are the biggest bestsellers are the best books?
yeah,
I
right.
mean, you really think some of those are going to be around to be remembered? I mean,
Yeah,
look at Herman Melville. Nobody wanted it. Nobody read it in the
right.
beginning. He couldn't. sell it. It was forgotten. Then 100 years later, it was a seller. So, I mean,
Like I
yeah,
said, you can't control legacy.
yeah, I can't control it. And if I were to probably try to paint for that with that in mind, I almost certainly would fail, because I mean, you look at like what was that book? The Judgment of Paris? Have you read that book?
Mhm.
It's about art. It's about the Impressionists. It's about that time. And there was an artist at the time who was the biggest, most famous artist. I can't remember his name now, which says a lot.
Right.
And he did these historical scenes, super detailed of battles and stuff. And he was the big artist at the time. He sold for the most money,
Right.
more than Google, more than anybody. And he is nobody's heard of him now. And that book is interesting because it starts from that point, that time, and then it tracks the changes and how all these impressionists were going their own way. Everybody despised them and hated them, and they didn't want them in the salon and all this stuff. So they just did their own thing. And they became the famous ones. So, it's really hard to predict.
So I
So,
will say for biographers, artists that do take their paintings in a way that they can follow, right? From
mhm,
whether they keep a log or whatever it is, a record and writings, that is very helpful in the future for those individuals. Like for me, for Dixon, he kept this
mhm.
beautiful log of all his paintings. He wrote, he documented all his paintings were documented. I
I
think,
do that. I keep a record
yeah,
of them in a book, but other than that, we don't have time to do too much more than that. But we write down the names of the models, and I write on the backs of the
yeah.
pictures
So
when
there you go.
and who the model was, that sort of thing. I
And
do
in,
care about
yeah,
the collector knowing some of that information. Yeah,
and that is leaving a legacy, whether you do it
sure.
intentionally or
Whether
not.
people are interested in it or not. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
there to be found. It's like
yeah,
writing in your novels and my novels. It's there if people are interested.
yeah.
Whether or not they are or not, I have no idea. But it's like doing that documentary. Okay, I said it. I won't feel guilty that I didn't stand up to these people and say this, say what I felt was the truth, or at least interview them and get them on the record.
Hmm.
Whether people are interested or not, I can't control, so I'm not going to worry about. I'm going to move on to the next thing. So,
And what is the next thing for you right now? What are you working on as we speak?
well, I'm doing paintings of models, and we just the same old thing. I write every morning. Right now, I'm writing. I mean, I'm always writing things. I write a lot of things. Some I publish, some I put on. And as far as published, I'll put them like on Facebook and Medium. These essays and short stories.
Mhm.
Some of those, tons of people read. Some don't.
And what's your
Um,
Facebook site? So people, if they want to go to it,
Oh, I don't know.
your
I mean,
name
just put
probably.
in my name, Scott Burdick, it should come up because it has a lot of followers, and Instagram. And then the Medium page, I have a link through there. But I have short stories and things on there. I wrote an essay on that you might find interesting. It's called Authenticity in Art. I wrote it a couple of years ago, and it's about Western art. And I oftentimes when I'm at shows and things, it starts out with me and Jeremy Lipkin and Logan Ashish having a discussion about what is authentic in Western art, and it was pretty interesting discussion because somebody was challenging Jeremy. That essay starts out with someone who came up to Jeremy and said, well, he had done a painting of Logan. Uh, Standing next to a fence out west. We've painted a lot. I paint a lot with them, and I've gone out a lot with the Vermilion Cliffs area.
Right.
And this is a painting of Logan they had at the Frida West several years back. And another artist came up to him and said, well, if you want to, Jeremy, if you want to paint some authentic cowboys, I could get you some authentic cowboys rather than dressing, Logan up as a cowboy. And, so that word authentic. And so Jeremy was, he's like, oh, well, I mean, as far as authentic, I wasn't dressing Logan up. He just that's his painting hat, and he dresses the way he dresses. And we were out painting, and I thought, oh, he looked cool there. We were painting a landscape, and I thought he looked cool standing in center. So I just snapped a photo of him, and I thought later in the studio, I was like, oh, that would make a neat painting. So I painted it. So she's like, okay, well, okay, I guess it's authentic then because it's a painting of Logan, not of a cowboy. And she said, even so, I could get you some. And so it led to this interesting discussion. Well, and then we had a discussion with her about authenticity, and I asked her some questions about what was authentic, if it was authentic, if you dress somebody up like Howard Turpin would do with his son and stuff. And, I'd known him well. Uh, and so it was an interesting discussion. And it was so funny because we finished and Jeremy was like, wow, yeah, that was interesting. And because I never thought that people would like question my painting because I didn't have a real cowboy in it. And I didn't mean it to be a cowboy. And I'm like, well, I don't think there'd be anything wrong if you did. But then a docent came up to Jeremy and said, "Oh, Jeremy, I love your painting of Logan. I was just wondering, is that barbed wire authentic?" And he was like, it was so funny because literally it came right after we're still standing there. And
Right.
he was, "Oh, I don't know. I mean, Logan was standing next to the barbed wire. What do you mean? Because I don't, and she was like, "Oh, well, I just mean, did you actually just make little lines for the thing, or did you actually study the barbed wire? Because there's different types of barbed wire."
There are lots of different types of barbed wire.
And I was wondering if you painted a specific kind, and Jeremy was like, "Well, I'm actually not sure. I don't know. I mean, I had a photograph that I worked from, so I don't know if I just kind of dashed in, if I was really paying attention to that." And she said, "Oh, well, we have a exhibition here in the museum. This was at the Prix West, so, of barbed wire and the different
Yeah.
types. Go
Willow
look." He
Rock
goes,
does too, by the way.
"Okay, that'd be interesting." So they went off and looked at it. And when he came back later, when I saw him later, he goes, "Well," he goes, "Phew," because I actually, she said she could identify from my painting the type of barbed wire. So he goes, "I guess it is authentic." He goes, "Wow, this is like really kind of weird." I keep getting challenged on my painting. So when those happen,
Well,
I
I
write
think
them
I
right
was gonna
away.
say, yeah, I was gonna say, I think the reason people are challenging it is because to them, that is what being authentic is, right?
Right.
From their cultural bias, whatever that is. You grow up in
Oh yeah.
Oklahoma, you may or may not, but you may really know what the barbed wire is. I happen to know
Yeah.
some of that myself. I've studied some of the
Right.
barbed wire. I know what the different
Yeah.
kinds are. And
I
so,
saw that at the museum, the whole thing about it. Yeah, it's
yeah,
really interesting.
so
Yeah,
I
and I
get
read
it.
about the history of it. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. Well,
So,
but that set me off on this idea of what exactly does authenticity in Western art mean, or in art in general. And so
right.
I wrote that little part down, but then it was interesting. Over maybe 2 years or 3 years, other conversations came up about authenticity, and so I would write them down. And I actually wrote the whole essay. It turned into an essay, but I've got like so many of these on my computer that I don't publish. They're just from my thoughts to keep working through this idea. And finally, I published it during COVID because of the backlash against Asians. And I had a conversation, and so this is near the end of that essay, but I have it go through several stages in different conversations. And there was a gallery friend of ours who we were having a lunch with, who asked me about any good Western artists for his gallery. And I said, "Oh, well, I mean, me and Situ's work and our friend Wei Han Lu, I mean, they're just the best of the best." And and I had just come back from a trip with Mian to China. We had gone there and had a show at a museum with several other artists from China. And Mian had said to me, "I don't think people will ever see me as an authentic Western painter because I'm Asian." And I was like, "Well, what are you talking about? Your work's in museums. You're in these museum collections." He said, "No, those are John Garrity. When he first approached me to do Western art, he wanted me to paint the Asian angle of it." He said, "So those paintings sell well, but if I paint a cowboy or an Indian, oftentimes it's very difficult for me to sell them because And I was like, "Well, I don't know if he's really." At the time, I thought when he was telling me this, when we were out painting in China, I thought, I don't know, I know some other Chinese artists who do Western things too, that seem to do successful. So maybe he's just, you know, overthinking it because he's kind of known for this subject or whatever. But then when we were having this lunch, the gallery, and I mentioned Mian and Wei Han, the gallery owner said, I really just don't feel that these Chinese artists, they're really good painters that come here and do Western art, are very authentic, because I think they're just doing it because it's a popular subject matter. They're not from the West or anything like that. And I said, "Well, but like I'm not from the West. I'm from Chicago. Bill Anton, Howard Turpin grew up in Oak Park too, by the way.
Right.
Same town Sue grew up in. I'm like, you know, Remington was from New York, and
Sure.
he's like, well, that's different. He said that, and I have all this in this essay. He said that's different though. I mean, you guys are American, so you kind of grow up with this Western sort of ethos, so it's kind of in your kind of cultural DNA. And I was like, oh, I didn't really know how to react to that. I was like, well, is he right? And then I realized one of his favorite artists was Mark Majori. And I said, well, but Mark, and I know Mark, we'd had a show, Jeremy and I had a show with him when he first came over here from France. And I said, well, but he's from France. He's only been here for, I mean, Mian has been here and Weihan, they've been here for like 35, 40 years. Their kids were born here, all this sort of stuff. How is Mark? He's French. And he said, well, but that's different. Mark, he grew up loving Westerns. He just loved Westerns. And so when he came here, that's what he wanted to paint. I said, well, but everybody loves Westerns. Trust me, we've been all over the world.
Right.
Everybody knows John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, whether you're in India, you're in Africa, you're in Europe, everybody, China, they love those Westerns.
Mhm.
And it was funny too, because it was one of the coolest moments. Sue was there right there with me. And the gallery owner, he was Jewish himself, his family. We knew some of his history about how difficult it had been for his parents to come over to the United States as immigrants. He said, "Oh my God, you are completely right." He said, you're right. There's no difference between Mark and Mian and Weihan except for Mark is white. And so when he dresses up like a cowboy, I think, and it was funny too, because I didn't have to make any of the arguments. I've read all these books on the
Right.
West and black cowboys and all this. And he's like, and you're right. I mean, most of the paintings are of white cowboys. And of course, they were only maybe a third of them. There was, Hispanic. There was so many African Americans. There was
Right.
all these mountain men were African. And he was like making all the arguments. He went right through it so quickly. He was like, I cannot believe that I am realizing that that is a racial bias on my part about who should be painting, who's
Right.
authentic to be
Right.
painting Western art. And it was really such an interesting moment. So I wrote it down at that time. And then it wasn't until Mian really, and I was like, wow, Mian was right. I mean, because I really was thinking Mian was overblowing this idea. But he literally was stating it. But one of the sad things he said was, because he said, yeah, you're right. We've gotten this idea of painting what we think of as a Hollywood Western. And that's our vision of authentic Western, white cowboys and all this stuff and these sort of stereotypes. And he said, but the thing is, I'm not sure if collectors see it that way, because I've heard that from collectors too about Asian artists.
Mm.
And that conversation is what made me uh, added into the essay that I've been writing in authenticity, which goes through all kinds of different permutations of different, and so I put that out there. And Mian and Weihan and a couple other Asian artists wrote me and read it, and they just said, "Thank you so much for putting this out there." I don't know that it will change things, but it is something that we have experience, because they paint all kinds of different things. But
Yeah,
they
of
said,
course.
"Well, we paint Western art," and it was funny too, because people don't ever question me if I go and paint China and sell paintings. Is this authentic? Or if I paint whatever,
Right.
you know? And in fact, I also put in the essay, I think I put that in the essay too. When I was at Prix de West, one of the artists there, I'm not going to name names because who knows if people are offended or not, but I can tell you when we're not on this, but he's a really good friend of mine. But he actually came up to me one time, and he's extremely religious. And I had done a painting, not in that show, but I'd had it in another show, and it was a painting of a church. And I love churches; they're so beautiful, just the beauty of it. And he said, "Why would you paint a Christian church, a Catholic church? And you're an atheist now. You don't believe in that stuff anymore." And he goes, "Because it kind of offends me that you would paint that, knowing that you don't believe what it stands for." And it was so interesting, because for a moment, I stopped and I thought, then I said, well, wait a minute. Your paintings are in the show here. You have a painting doing the ghost dance. And a lot of your paintings do Native American ceremonies. You don't believe those are true he's a very devout Christian. And it was so funny, because he just was like, looked at me and it was like, okay, all right, I get it. Yeah, you're right. And I went, no, a bit. I said, I'm painting it because it's beautiful. Even if I paint, nobody ever says this when I paint a mosque or when I paint Indian temple and, India. I don't believe in Ganesha is really rose from the dead either. He had his head cut off and put back on. And he was like, we had an interesting discussion about it. And he was like, yeah, he goes, I'm glad I brought that up to you because yeah, I see it. I had never, he goes, it was weird because I didn't even think about that. But you're right. Of course, I don't actually believe in that ghost dance was true or anything. And so these things are just fascinating to me to talk about and think about. So, but
And so
yeah.
we can get a flavor of this by going to Facebook, and that essay is up on the authenticity.
Yeah, I mean those are that was so long ago. If you go to my Medium page, so there's a link like in Facebook and
Yeah,
on my Instagram too, and you can click Medium is where people post articles
right.
and essays and stories. I have some
Right.
short stories on there, some essays
Yes.
about various things. So those are just a few of the ones that I put out there. But that essay is on there. It's called Authenticity in Art.
Oh yeah, I
And
want to read that for sure.
I think you might find that interesting because it was interesting to me to think about a lot of issues I hadn't really thought about art, and it was kind of fun. They're fun to again. Most of them I just write them and don't put them up, but every now and then I put some of them up, and but they help me think through these issues. So yeah.
I imagine they get lots of comments as well.
Yeah, they get lots of comments. I mean, and I try to make them entertaining. So like Kwang Ho loved that essay on that. He wrote me right away, and a lot of people are always asking me now. You'll see when you read the essay, but a lot of people are always asking me now. So what does Frank think about that? Think about this. So I won't give it away, but when you read the essay, you'll know who Frank is.
Okay.
And I had created that character for my third novel, but I used him in some of the essays because
That
he's
novel, that novel's out, right? You've published three.
three, yeah. And the first two are the third one is quirky. Some people love it and some people don't, but the first two, I think the first one is my best novel, Nahala. It's a science fiction one. It's a long novel. It's more about philosophy and all that.
And
And
that's on
goes
you can get those on Kindle and
You can
Audible.
get those, yeah, you go on Amazon, you can get the print book, you can get the Kindle book, and also a company. That one was quite popular, the first one, and so a audiobook company contacted me, um, and they made an audiobook of that one, and also the second one, the Immortality Contract, which you know. I mean, I don't know if they're going to actually make a movie of, but that's what I'm writing right now. Is I'm writing a screenplay out for the producer who bought the option, and has paid me a couple of times for that to make it as a limited series on Netflix or somewhere like that. So
Yeah,
so
you
that's kind
never
of fun.
know. Yeah, oh, it is. Those are
Yeah,
fantastic. But you
yeah.
never
So
know. What I have learned is you never know where those go.
oh yeah, absolutely. No, it's just nice knowing people like it. I mean, he's given it to a whole bunch of different people.
Yeah.
It's kind of neat. He's given it to some pretty famous people who just, I mean, the novel, they just love the novel. So, and that's a shorter novel, so it's easier to adapt into a film. But
And
at first when they asked me, I was
that's
like,
called what? That
that one
novel.
is called The Immortality Contract.
Okay.
That's a fun one. It's from three different viewpoints. It's from an atheist scientist viewpoint, and his granddaughter who has a near-death experience and becomes a born-again Christian, and from a Muslim who has his own near-death experience and has his own different thing. And so it's about how do we well, it's about all kinds of things, but it's kind of fun. It's those three viewpoints through the story, and that was one of those things too, where I wanted to really write. Uh, Part of it, I remember I was writing it when I did my long interview with Richard Dawkins, and it was fascinating. I put some of what he said in the novel because he is mostly no scientist, and I'd read all his books, and we became really good friends. Uh, when we met each other, but he would ask me things like, how could people possibly reject evidence for evolution? There's so much evidence. I mean, it's insane to actually think the Earth is 6,000 years old and stuff. And so he'd say, you do these interviews with these documentaries and you talk to all these people. I don't really talk to many people who believe this. So he goes, he was so confused. And so this wasn't during our interview. This was during a lunch after one of the interviews that I did for the documentary. But I put it in the book in other characters' words. And so I said, well, let me try to give you into their thought process. And he said, well, good luck. And so I said, suppose tomorrow someone shows up, the police show up, and they arrest you for murdering somebody in Los Angeles. Okay. He said, what would you say? He said, like, well, I would say I couldn't have been there. I was with you. I have witnesses that I was here. I was not in Los Angeles. I said, what if they said, we have you on videotape. We have your DNA blood at the scene. We have all kinds of evidence proving that you did this murder. And he'd say, what would you say? How would you explain that? He said, well, I would say I can't explain it, but I mean, I know the truth already that I was here with you, and so I couldn't have done it. And so I said, you just reject their evidence? He said, well, yeah, because I already know the truth. And so therefore that had to have either been faked or, and he was like, okay, I see what you're doing. He says, I understand what you're saying. He said, and I said, well, see, the thing is, and he said, but their evidence isn't that kind of evidence, which is, and I said, no, you don't understand. There's different sorts of evidence. So scientific evidence is the way you think, and it's mostly the way I think. But most of the people that I interview, whether they're Hindu or Muslim or whatever, the most common things that people say to me about why do they believe in the Quran or whatever it is that they believe in, is I had this experience. Sometimes it's an actual vision, but they know. One of the imams that I interviewed, the Muslim imam, said, when I got the Quran, and he had been Christian, when I got the Quran and read it, I just knew. I got this overwhelming feeling that this was truth. I've heard the same thing from Mormons about the Book of Mormon and all these different things. I said, so their evidence, this feeling in their heart, this thing to them is like you saying, I know I was here. And so it's more about what do you trust as your evidence? And he said, okay, he goes, I disagree with that because people can be wrong about their evidence. And obviously all these people using their feeling in their heart can't all be right. So that just proves right there that that is not a good test of evidence. It can't be reproduced like science. He goes, but I see your point. And he goes, it does make me realize it's not as crazy because, right, if you know that that's true, then, right, evolution can't be true because, and so those are interesting. Those are what I like to do in those books is to, and the book clubs that have had the immortality contract, that was the most gratifying thing is the ones that have written me about their book club is they said, we didn't even realize how all these people in our book club had these different views, religious views, until we had your book and everybody talked about it. And everybody felt that their viewpoint was fairly represented. And it's funny too, because I get people, even the producer who bought the rights to the book, he loved the book. And he said, he says, it kind of seems to me like you, at the end, your conclusion is that Alma, who is the granddaughter, the born again Christian, that she's right. He said, you don't say it exactly, but I said, oh, that's so funny. I said, I feel like I did all of them. Of course, my view on it. He goes, yeah, but it seems like you wrote it that way. I said, other people tell me that it seems like I believe the Muslim is right and that the atheist is right. So I said, it's interesting how everybody reads in differently to it with this same evidence. But that's kind of what I like to do is to all my stories are about complexity and that there's no simple answer to things. I'm definitely not one to write, hey, this is the truth. It's like the documentaries, why I just like to ask questions. I still know that you probably see my bias come through, but I don't actually say, this person's right and this person's wrong. Everybody makes their case, and different people will say, I think the Christian was right in your film, and I think the atheist was right, or I think I interviewed Hare Krishnas. I interviewed like 11 different religions in it and stuff. And so somebody told me recently, said, I think the Hare Krishna in your film was right. The government should ban all eating meat in all slaughterhouses because it's against God's rules, And so and I'm glad you had that person say that on there, and but I don't tell them you're wrong or that's,
When you write these characters in your book, they're all protagonists, though, right? They all are coming, or do some of them are they protagonists and antagonists? In other words,
I don't write anybody who I feel is just evil.
yeah. So
Okay.
you come
I,
from,
I think everybody, if you look at it from their viewpoint, you can see you can see the logic behind what they're doing. Okay. So
and I would guess also the love.
right. Everybody thinks they're doing good. I
Yeah.
mean, even people flying planes into the buildings at 9/11 felt like they were doing God's things. Like in my first film, I asked different people, would you kill your own child or the women and children if God told you to? Because there's stories in the Bible, there's stories in the Bhagavad Gita, there's stories in the Quran, there's stories in all the different religious books about. And so I asked Christians, I asked Muslims, uh, I asked Mormons, I asked born again Christians and Catholics, all these different people. I asked that same question, and I asked 3 of our state representatives. They all said they would. I only had a couple people who said they wouldn't, and they blamed themselves. They said I wouldn't because I wasn't strong enough. But again, their logic is that one of them used the example of, well, those people who dropped the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima, they just trusted that this was saving more lives in the long run, and they trusted that the generals and the people ordering them knew the bigger picture. So we feel like God knows the bigger picture. And so even if you're ordered to do something that seems horrible, maybe you're saving millions of people by doing this. And so from that point of view, even the most monstrous thing, but it was surprising. The first time I asked that question, I kind of expected someone to get mad at me. But so many people said that they would, even with their own family standing in the background. And that was one too, where I got several people who wrote me when the film came out and said, I want you to take that out. Me saying that. And I had the same conversation with 3 different people who called me and asked me to do that. And I said, well, one of them said, he was an artist, and he said, I feel like you kind of ambushed me with that question, even though I always tell people you can skip any question you want to talk about.
Right.
And I said, well, so you feel like it was kind of like popped on you and you didn't have time to think about it? He goes, yeah. And I said, well, what would you think now? It's been 6 months later since I did that interview. What would you say now? And he said, he thought about it and said, well, I mean, it's what I believe. I'd have to say the same thing. And I said, well, then it wasn't that I tricked you into saying it and I didn't take it out of context. If it's what you really believe, that's my purpose in making a documentary. And I said, lots of other people said this same thing. And he said, well, but I just think people might think bad of me for saying that. And I said, well, I mean, that may be true, but some people will probably agree with you and say, yes, he gave the theologically correct answer. And but he was still not happy with it. And but I said I would take it out if you said you had misspoken or you changed your mind, but I really can't because it wouldn't be fair to other people that I leave in there. And I so but it was very difficult for me. I really felt extremely bad, for some of the things that people said in there that I knew that some people are not going to like what they said. But yeah, I mean, and I think that's why I'm actually I'm not excited about doing documentaries, because I've been asked to do other ones for big budget, and I don't want to do them because it really is emotionally. I only did it because I felt it was important, and it's really emotionally difficult for me.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you feel empathy for all sides, even if
I do. Yeah,
exactly. And that's hard because sometimes when you're probably doing the documentary, you're interviewing these individuals and they're saying things that are going to be controversial or get them in hot water, but that's literally what they're saying.
Well, and even doing things that are so destructive to them. I mean, for that film too, while I was filming it, the End Time group, that Harold Campion group, I don't know if you remember, they thought May 21st was going to be the end of the world. So they went around, there was thousands of them all over the world, really, but in this country, they would be near a motorhome came through Winston-Salem with it saying, May 21st, the end of the world, repent. And so I talked to them, and they had all like taken their kids out of school. They had been traveling then for months, and they said, we believe you need to spend your last penny, to try and save someone, or we're not going to be raptured. And so I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Because so many people, when I tell them about the film I was making, they would say, well, I don't think a lot of people really believe that. They just, they just, they want to go to heaven, or, they're hedging their bets. Uh, but I thought, well, these people, you can really know that they really believe this, because I mean, they're throwing their lives away. And so I said, well, do you mind if I meet up with you? It would have been a couple months from that time, when for the last 3 days of the world, and travel with you and film you. And and they knew I didn't believe it, but they said, well, yeah, you're welcome to come. Nobody's going to see your film, because they were convinced the end of the world was coming.
Right.
So I went with them, and I traveled with them for 3 days in their motorhomes through Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, in Townsend, Pennsylvania, and it was amazing how much fear that telling someone, "What if you're wrong? You better." How many people they convinced, but other people were really angry at them, especially Christians, saying, you're wrong. But I just felt so bad for them. I put some clips of them in the film, but I put a longer version out of what I did, but I felt so sad and depressed for them. Seeing knowing that. In fact, I called a couple of them, their kids, because they were older. Some of them was older, and a lot of their kids said this is nonsense. And I told them, well, you need to go be with your father, because they had invited me to come and spend the last day when the rapture was going to happen. Because then I went home and prayed, and they were expecting the end of the world.
Right.
But I couldn't do it. I couldn't go there and film them for that. I felt, and now that, of course, that would make a great film. Everybody who saw the longer version I put out said, "How come you didn't show?" We wanted to laugh and see them realize they were wrong. It was like I couldn't do it. I mean, it was one thing to kind of show the dangers of it, but I couldn't film them during that
They're going to
emotional
have
moment.
grief. They're going to have grief, and their
Yeah,
whole way they see the world has changed, and which makes confusion, and they don't know. They don't
yeah,
understand. And that's going to be a great process of introspection for those people, which,
yeah.
yeah, it's hard to go
It
through.
really, it really depressed me, though. In fact, it was funny when I interviewed Richard Dawkins. I had told him of that story about that, because he'd seen that, and he just said, "Oh, I have a hard time feeling sorry for people that silly, that kind of deluded." And I brought up the children, and he said, "Well, I do feel horrible for the children." And I asked him later in our lunch. I said, "You said you felt sorry for the children." I said, "But you know, at what point?" He said, because the children don't have a choice, or they're indoctrinated into this. I said, what point, when those kids grow up, you weren't indoctrinated as thoroughly into this sort of viewpoint as they were. At what point, as those children grow up, do you no longer feel sorry for them? Because
Right.
most people just keep what they believe, what they're taught as children, whether it's Hindu or whatever it is.
Right.
Um, and he said, you're right. He goes, I didn't think of it that way, but you're right. He said, I'm too quick to just dismiss it and say that's stupid. He goes, you're right. A lot of this stuff is, things that we are given through our cultures, our biases,
Right.
just like me thinking gays are, evil and crazy people. I mean, once I saw that wasn't true, I changed my view. But some people grow up, with two parents of the same sex, and they don't even have to face that,
Right.
that sort of bias. So it is it was a lot of education for me. I'm glad I did all those things, but I don't know if I have the emotional, if I'm able to handle
Bandwidth to do
doing
that.
more of those. Yeah,
Yeah.
it really does.
Yeah, of course it does.
A lot of those things really did affect me a lot.
I'm
So yeah,
sure. And it would affect your painting too. When you have those kind of things going on in your life, if you're still painting when you're
yeah,
doing that, it's going to affect how you paint, what you see,
right, yeah,
everything, right? Especially for you, because you're emotionally based, clearly.
right.
And
The
what,
best thing about it is it makes me not quick to just dismiss people as, well, they're just a racist jerk, or this or that. It's to actually realize, well, there's probably reasons why they
of course there is.
are given this
Yeah.
disadvantage,
Yeah.
and so when, like your original question, so when I write characters, I don't write characters that this person is a racist or this person is a jerk.
Right.
You can see that they have that belief, but then I like to then see why they have it, or even
Yeah.
maybe there's some logic behind what they have that makes you understand it and maybe even feel compassionate for that
Yeah.
person. So
Yeah, even on the most evil characters I write, I think all of them, I've tried to show that there was some reason that they developed that kind of, outcome in their life, whatever it was, usually it's trauma based, you know,
yeah,
and, even though you may hate them and want them to not do well, you can still go, yeah, but he did have that horrible parent. And, there was things that made him or her into this monster. Right.
right,
And,
right.
and that's true for all of us, right? We all have those influence that affect how we see the world and what we do. And hopefully most of them are good, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're really bad. And
Yeah,
we have to try to, either overcome it or in some cases embrace it. So,
yeah.
you know,
Well, and understanding it is the first step to being able to actually change it.
right.
Because if you just tell people, you're an idiot or you're stupid, and maybe the thing that they're supporting is dangerous or whatever, but just saying that is, you're not going to actually be able to have a conversation
No, you
about it.
close down all
You're gonna have
conversations
effect.
with that. You show no empathy, and
Mhm.
everybody deserves empathy no matter what.
Well, and the nice thing is when I have conversations, I try to make a real point of when people point out things that I have thought for years or just got wrong. They point it out to me. I try to really make a point of telling them thank you or even writing them later when I find out they're right. Because it is hard when you find out you're wrong about things, but gosh, I mean, it's just so cool when somebody feels comfortable enough to tell you,
Right.
you know, Scott, I think you need to look at this again. This issue is not as simple as you were making it seem like.
Right.
Um, Now, and if you bite their head off, they're never going to tell it. Nobody's going to ever say that to you. So, I mean, to me, when somebody comes up to me and tells me something like that, I feel like, wow, that's so cool that I made it so that they felt comfortable telling me something, and I'm not going to and even if they're wrong on it, I'm not going to out them and tell everybody, this person's a racist because they said this or they used the wrong pronoun or whatever, and shame them publicly. And that's the difficulty with a documentary because, in some ways that's what you're doing. You're putting them out publicly, you
Yeah,
warn them, and everything, but that's why that's hard for me to do. But,
I get it. I think again, it's because you have great empathy, you're very sensitive to everything. And that makes it
yeah,
hard sometimes. I think probably for a lot of journalists, it's easier if they can just throw all that away and just document, right? But
well, right.
but you're a guy who's painting too and making beautiful objects and, coming from an inner source. And when you tap into that inner source of, I would say even spirituality,
Mhm.
when you tap into whatever that is, that you see the world differently. And I think most artists see the world differently, honestly.
Yeah. Well, and that comes through in their paintings. That's why I like Dan Gerhardt. I love his paintings. They so
Yeah.
reflect his spiritual views and
Yeah.
his life and
Yeah.
his environment.
Yeah. Exactly. So we've
Well,
spoke.
I have to interview you someday about your spiritual journey.
It's a long one, let me tell you. It's not, but it's an interesting one. But for another day, for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so as we kind of wrap this up, because believe it or not, we've gone for 2.5 hours. So, which
Wow.
doesn't surprise me at all. I knew no, I didn't. I knew we'd have a long talk. Um, because I could just tell because the way our conversation when we had lunch, or dinner, I can't remember which one it was. Dinner it was, that it would be a journey, right? That's what we're doing. We're taking a journey, you and I
Mhm.
together. So, but to finish up the journey, which is just a little component of what is there, I know there's a lot more. What can people do or see of your art that's coming out in the future for people who want to follow that component of you? Like, do you have any shows coming up or that
Let's
kind
see. I sent a couple paintings I hadn't done it in a couple years, but I told them I'd send a couple. So I sent a couple paintings to the Autry show coming up
of,
when is that? February?
that's February?
Uh,
Are you going to go out to that show? Do you know?
I'm not going to go out this time because have some my parents are having health issues, so I've been going back and forth to Chicago a lot. So I kind of told them I would send them to, but I couldn't come to the show this year. And so they said that was fine. So I'm not going to go to that show, and I'll definitely be doing the Pre to West show, next year, and I'll be going to that for sure. Soon I will. I don't have any shows can't scheduled right now. I'll be sending things to something at 1261 in Denver. I told Kwang I'd send something for a show they're doing there. But I don't have any big major shows right now scheduled. I'm just painting and I'm sending some things out here and there for things. So yeah.
Okay.
And you go to our website is just my name, scottburdick.com or susanlyon.com.
And they're both on the same website, so you can see.
It goes to the same
Yeah,
place.
right.
And then we have our Facebook and Instagram. Sue has a Patreon, which has been the funnest thing this last couple of years. It's patreon.com/Susan Lyon.
And is she doing that for her artwork?
What we're doing is more of a teaching thing because I don't do workshops anymore. Sue does workshops a couple a year, and I go with her. And so we're going to be going to ones. We went to once France last year, and Italy, and Florence, and we're going to go to come in Scotland and for Rosemary Brushes. And she teaches, and I just paint. And sometimes with the class, sometimes on my own, and people can paint with me. But the Patreon, Sue started during COVID when her workshops got canceled. And so we just every month we post, I don't know, 2 or 3 things. So some are just videos of us talking about techniques. Some are full videos where Sue will film or I'll film a whole painting. Sometimes long paintings, I'll film them and then just speed them up or do them in clips. So demos, she'll film me doing photo sessions. I did one at the barn down the street from us with a girl and her horses. And then ones of models going over cameras, going over techniques, painting techniques. She'll film us. She filmed us in Rome. She filmed a painting I did in Rome, on the river there. So we probably got like 150 videos on there now. And so people just pay like $9 a month and they can watch all the videos and they can continue to subscribe or just subscribe 1 month and watch everything and go off. And it's been the funnest thing. I mean, it's become quite popular. Tomorrow we're doing a live stream one. She's doing this where we has like a paint together once a month. So I'll go to her studio and we're just going to paint either from a model or from a photo. And then she gives the photo to I think she's got like, I don't know how many subscribers she has, maybe 350 or 400 and artists from all over the world. And so everybody just paints together and she has it on Zoom. And so people come in and so she has pictures of us painting and then people talk and they can look at each other's paintings and she provides them photos of what we're painting. So some people paint that, some people paint whatever they're painting. And so it's kind of become a bit of a community. It's just an extremely fun thing. She had this idea to do it. So I know how to use cameras and stuff. So I showed her how to use camera and do some editing and things. And the funnest thing is all these people from like Africa and India and these other countries that they said they've never been able to afford a full video because they were so expensive to buy a DVD and ship them. And they'll get all their friends from their village and we get these messages and they'll sign up for $9 for a whole group of them in their village. They'll watch every video. They'll do paintings of the paintings we do and they just then go off. And then like maybe another 6 months they'll sign in again, but they're like, we've never been able to afford, to do these things. So that's why Sue wanted to not give it a high price like some of the people had advised us to do. So that's been very fun and
rewarding. Again, it's rewarding because you can give back, and
we always have artists come and visit us. So like Logan Ajish, when he started out, he'd come and paint with us. He had taken workshops from me. And I mean, God, there's so many artists in the Pre to West. I feel so old that had taken workshops and come out and paint with us. So an incredible artist, I'm sure Kyle Ma, he's going to be coming out in a few weeks for a week. And we just hired models. We have many young artists, Katie Whipple, all kinds of different, really great artists you'd recognize. And that's just, we don't charge for that, just young artists. They come out and we hire models and then we just paint together, for several days or a week. And, Kyle Ma, I think he's a better painter than me. So I don't know what he thinks he's going to learn from me, but he's, of me and Sue, but he's excited. He's asked us for a couple of years. So we finally have a slot. And so he's going to come out in a few weeks, and we'll all paint together. We have models scheduled every day.
That
So
sounds.
those are what we're doing. Yeah.
Well, Scott, it was just wonderful talking to you, and you're
You
such
too.
an interesting person, and I really enjoyed the component of just talking about the writing, the documentaries and things, because I don't know if people really know that component about you. They're gonna know now.
Well,
So
it's fun because it's like I actually get bored of talking about painting all the time with the painting podcast. And there's other podcasts that I've been on that they're about writing. So they don't even know I'm a painter. So we just talk about the novels. And then there's other ones that, of course, I've had many that people want to just talk about the documentaries. And I've actually stopped doing interviews or podcasts about the documentaries because I just feel like I'm just repeating myself and people
right,
can just see the documentary. So this was kind of fun to have a little bit of a crossover to talk
yeah, it's
about
everything.
other things than just art. Yeah.
Well, you're
Yeah.
clearly a deep thinker, and you are, and that's fine. That's a good thing to be. I think it's important. Um, and it shows in your work. I love your art. I think you're very talented as an artist. I'm now going to dive into your other medias that you've worked in and writing and feature, though I have
Well, I'm
some.
gonna right now. I'm gonna order one of your
Yeah.
books as an audiobook because I'll listen to it when I paint.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think like 6 of them are probably on audio and something to that.
fantastic. That's great. I love audiobooks. Oh man,
And then I'll we'll talk. I want to touch base with you about a couple other things we're working on later. I'll
sure.
just reach out to you and we can talk about those. But it sounds like I need to have your wife on too.
Yeah, she's a more interesting interview than me. She's definitely got a lot of personality.
I can
Yeah,
only imagine.
she's really good. Yeah.
Well, she has to be married to you, right?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know why she's married to me. Maybe it's just because we complement each other. She is who I'm tech support.
Yeah.
So she
Okay.
is who she
All
calls
right.
when she needs help with the cameras or with this or with
All
that or
right.
with
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
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 Now I'll probably go check out her Patreon thing and see that too. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. There's a lot on there. Yeah. That's a pretty fun thing. It's really been neat to see. I never would have done that on my own. That's for sure.
Well, it's great for writers too. It's a way they can actually get paid, because
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's
it's
true. Yeah. I
very
hadn't thought
difficult
of
to
that.
make any kind of money as a writer, as
Yeah.
we both know. It's my hats are
Yeah,
off.
I'm fortunate I don't have to worry about that. I can just write. But if
Same,
I stop making
same for
money,
me,
I would
right?
do it for a living. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah, same for me. I mean, it's I do it because I want to do it for myself, and if other people enjoy it, then that's a bonus. But try to
Yeah.
make a living at it for me would be very difficult to do.
Yeah.
I know my brother's a writer and he has a hard time, making it as a living too. So
Yeah.
he's won
Yeah.
major awards and things, and it's still tough.
Oh,
So,
that's cool though. Yeah, that's really neat.
all right, we will talk soon, very soon. And
Okay.
anything else you want to leave with the audience? Anything you want to say? I think you said a
I
lot.
really,
Anything?
I don't have, I'm trying to think if there's any more people I can offend, but I think I've
Oh
covered them
no, I'm
all.
sure there's a few other groups. So do you have, I'm just curious though, do you have any words to say? Because I like to ask this question because you've gone through the process, you've made your life about creativity. What about those people who are thinking, I want to be a writer, I want to be a documentarian, or I want to be a painter? What advice would you give those individuals?
My best advice in anything you want to do is most of it is about getting into a routine.
Mm,
Okay. So I have a lot of writers who also contact me and ask things. Then I have lots of people who say, I've always wanted to write a novel, but I don't have time. And I mean, I think like John Grisham's story. He was a
yes.
lawyer. He just set aside like in 2 hours every morning. He'd
Yep.
get up early. He would write 2 hours.
Yep.
Painting is like that. Writing is like that, especially those things because they're very solitary. It's
Yes.
more difficult when you make film. It's unless you're making a documentary on your own, you can do it that way. Um, a routine. Get yourself into a routine, whether you have kids or whatever you have. I mean, I get up really early, but a lot of successful writers I know that have done it for years and finally made it big, or even if they didn't, they became good artists, writers, or if they don't just to get better, you have to have a routine. So you have to say, this is the 2 hours every day that I'm going to write. It's
Yep.
especially if it's quiet, if it's in the morning or late at night or whatever. And you just say, I'm going to write. And even if you're not inspired, even if you write and you just hate everything you did and you delete it all.
Yep.
Okay. I write so many things that are complete wastes of time, but I stick to that routine.
Yeah.
And then the same thing is true with painting, is if you're not, I mean, for us, sometimes it's a little easier because you're motivated. Okay, I've got this deadline, I've got this or that and stuff like that. But when you don't have that yet, and of course that was years before I had that routine. Okay, I'm going to school, I'm going to the palette and chisel. So that's the big thing. The other thing is to get together with other people.
Mhm.
So I probably would never have gone to the palette and chisel every single night and on the weekends if it wasn't for other artists that were all starting out, that were all going there. I was like, I don't want to miss Nancy and Rose and Sue learning something from Richard or from just whatever, and I'm going to miss out. So
Right.
it made me to go. And we could also talk about it. It's easier to learn from people who are also struggling with you. You paint with people better than you and you'll learn things from them. But having a group of writers, whether it's online, when I wrote my first novel, I used Scribophile, which is an online site where you could exchange critiques. And that was so fun. And that really helped me. And it was exciting to, okay, send my next chapter, get my notes, give notes to people. One of the writers on there, at the end, I gave him advice. He was turned down by his publisher. He'd had a science fiction book published before, and he said, "Well, you've been trying to give me some big advice, but I've always said I don't want to rewrite this too much. So you stuck to the style stuff." He said, "What do you think now?" So I told him what I really thought. I said, "You're writing all these things, all the most dramatic things in your stories. You're having someone tell this thing that happened to them. You're not showing the actual event." I says, "Your story is dramatic," and he rewrote it because he'd been turned down by his publisher. And then he published, and he said that was what that was the thing. So, and then he gave me advice. All the people that I did, even people who weren't great writers, so many people would notice things that I never would have thought about, and just
Right.
seeing their reactions. So it's the same thing with other artists, getting together with them, whether it's online. That's why I love this Patreon thing where we have all the people. It's Sue's trying to make it into more of a community where people can post their own work and stuff. And so that inspiration, those two things. I'm sorry, a long-winded thing. Two
Oh,
things: routine and painting with other people or writing with other people, getting with other people who share your interests and
yeah.
will help to you motivate each other, you push each other.
Yeah.
So those are the two things I think. And I see that when I see that in writing and art and everything, I see that with people who get together. I mean, I look at the great artists from Los Angeles, Logan and Jeremy and Glenn Dean, all these people I knew when they were just starting out. They fed off each other. All these different
Yeah.
artists,
And they still do.
they still do. And
Yeah.
we had that at the Palette and Chisel and at the American Academy. And so rarely do you see one person just completely do it without knowing any other people or having other people to inspire you. So
Yeah, the routine thing is big. I
yeah.
agree with that 100% because people say, "Oh, you must not sleep because I do all these different components." I go,
Mhm.
"No, I sleep I get my 8 hours for sure, but I have very rigid routines of getting work done and doing things, and that's the only way you can get it done is to you're going to write 10 novels on the side. You better set up 2 hours a night or however
Yeah.
you do
People
to
get
write.
overwhelmed. They think, how can I write this huge thing? And you just can't think that way. You got
Yeah,
to just think, I want to just write this one page,
yeah,
you
it's
know, and then one page
1,500
after the
words.
other. Yeah.
It's my 1,500 words a night kind of a thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, so, and even if it's only a half hour, whatever it is
Yeah, whatever
that
it
you
is.
do, it has to compound over time. Because once you stop getting out of the routine, it's so easy to go months without doing anything.
Or
And
years.
and then it becomes years. And then, and then people have this idea, I know so many people who have done this. I have set aside 3 months and I'm just gonna go get a cabin and I'm just gonna write my novel. It doesn't work that way,
That's very
or
different.
do my painting. And it just doesn't work that way. It has to be done over time, and you
Yeah.
just lose energy. You can't just work 12 hours a day for a month and think you're going to come out with something great.
Yeah, it would be very unusual. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, there would have to be something else pushing you or guiding you to make you to do that. That is, some, and I can't express what it is. I can see that happening but only if there was a driving force in you so hard that you are completely committed and wanted to do it, which
Well,
is
I get
rare.
that way when I'm really into trying to finish a novel or
Yes,
painting, big painting. I will get to where I won't paint for several months and I
yes,
will just work on the novel pretty
yes,
much as nonstop. And I do that with some really large paintings too.
yes.
Um, so that happens, but it's not like, you don't do anything for years and then all of a sudden you think
No,
you're going to set aside 3 months
no.
and you're going to plan this out. It kind of just takes you over,
Yeah,
you
I was
know,
going to say, and you're probably thinking about it all the time, and you're
right.
just, it's there brewing and brewing and brewing. And then you
Yeah.
finally go, now I've got to get it out of me.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I understand
Well,
that.
it's fun to talk to you. We have so much more in common than I would have thought.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, we have creativity. That's our
Yeah,
that's our
yeah,
guiding force, quite frankly,
yeah,
for both
yeah,
of us. Uh,
yeah.
so, oh
That's
yeah,
pretty cool.
we'll have another one of these conversations again, but just over lunch.
Yeah, sounds
Dinner
good.
or something like that.
Sounds good. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
All right, Scott. Thank you for taking the time, and I'll talk to you later about another project I'm working on.
Okay.
All
All
right,
right. Sounds good.
very good. Thank you
All right.
again. All right,
Thanks.
bye.